Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon, Prof.
How's everyone today?
Alhamdulillah.
Okay. Nice to see faces.
Yeah.
My wall of faces. Okay. We got 13 online. So let's give another 2 minutes and we'll get started. So how's everyone doing? Okay. Getting to the end of the semester, finally. It's been a rather long semester, huh?
Surviving.
Like a marathon. The campus is so quiet. No students and half the staff.
Yeah.
$13,001. There's no more coming.
Nat want to say something? You just
Huh?
staring. Nadira wants to say something.
Nadira wants to say
No?
something?
No?
No, Nadira?
She looks.
Feel free to say something. Okay, well, we'll get started. There's 13 of you online, so I think the rest will start coming in. So,
Yeah.
alhamdulillah, this is the 14th and final week of class. And we've got no students presenting tonight, so I'll be presenting tonight. So I've prepared some slides. In fact, I loaded the slides up on the WhatsApp group in PDF form and then also in Puja Blast. So let me first start by taking a look at the Puja Blast. Where is you? Blast. It's not Puja Blast. Okay, can you all see the Puja Blast?
Yes.
All right. So just to first start by going over some, just to revisit the important dates coming up. So you guys, your assignment 5 is due week 14. Since this is actually week 13, you have another week to finish it. Okay. I don't know if you guys are all aware of that, but I probably should have told you that, huh? I apologize. So I hope none of you rushed to get it done this week. I do apologize that week 14 is actually next week. So we're still in week 13 for the semester. So you do have another week to finish the code book. And then assignment 6 is due on the day, as I mentioned, on the day of the final exam on the 4th of August. Okay. So both of those you can just straight away upload to Puja Blast when you're ready. For the thesis critique, please upload, as it says, please either upload along with your assignment, either the thesis, just the cover page, or at least write the full citation in the assignment of the thesis. Okay, so at least I know what the thesis, the title, the author, and all that. All right. And then our final exam on the 4th of August, inshallah, in the evening, 6 to 8. And as I mentioned, I think last week in class, I'm going to ask you to turn on your cameras while conducting the exam. Like I said, I apologize for that. It seems a bit silly, but in the environment we're in, we have to be silly sometimes because we have no choice on how to do things. So we have been asked to request that students, you know, at least show their faces while they're taking the exams. All right, so just to forewarn you, so please comb your hair and straighten your tudong before the exam on the 4th. Okay, and then, so tonight we will be discussing the final topic of the class, week 14, guidelines for judging the quality of qualitative research. And so I'll be walking us through this article by Letts and Company called Guidelines for Critical Review Form Qualitative Studies. In the literature, actually, there's several of these types of, there's sort of guides on what constitutes a good quality study, you know, like a good quality research study. They have them both for quantitative and qualitative research. So this one is on qualitative research. And so walking us through it. Nadira, I'll get to your question in a minute, yeah? So, well, let me just finish this and I'll get to your question. And so it basically takes us through the whole process. So everything that we've pretty much covered this semester, we're basically just going to rehash and walk through the whole process to make sure that we've hit on all the important components and aspects of a good qualitative study. This article is written more for people who are being requested to review qualitative research journal articles. So they do mention article reviewing at different points, but the concepts are the same and the principles of good quality research are the same. So we can just apply them more or less to a thesis. Okay, so you can use this guideline for your own work, you know, so as you get closer to the end of your study, or maybe you want to do it at the beginning of the study as well as a planning guide to help you to see whether you are, you know, incorporating all those elements of good quality qualitative studies. All right, so they're quite useful in that sense. They give you a good overview of what you should have in there. So I would recommend that you make use of them for your own work. Okay, and then we're gonna say goodbye by me asking you to get on to Padlet, and I've provided the link both in Pucha Blast or it's on WhatsApp. You can click on the link and it'll take you to our class Padlet. And I am going to ask you to, I'll just show you what the Padlet looks like quickly. Where is that Padlet? Oh, it's here, sorry. Let me just pull it up. So it looks like this. And you're going to go in and you're going to fill in one of these boxes. You just go into the Padlet screen and you just double click, and then this box will pop up, and then you can write whatever you want to write. And so I'm asking you if you will write, this is for both, I think both of us, for both you and myself. I'd like to know what you felt that you learned this semester, like what you felt you learned more of this semester that you didn't know prior to the semester. And then also something that you still think you need to learn more about. Maybe there's a certain topic or two, or maybe there's more that you feel like, well, you know, I may have learned a few things more, but I still feel like I need a deeper, richer understanding of that topic. Okay, so just for example, I put here, you know, like I learned more about data analysis and how to code, and then I still need to learn more about how to apply theory to my study, blah, blah, blah. So it's just an example of what I'm asking you to do. And there's no name attached here, it's anonymous, so don't feel like, you know, other students are going to find out who said what. There's no names. It's anonymous, okay? So if you could just do that, and we won't do that in class. We'll adjourn. I think we'll probably adjourn a bit early tonight, maybe by 5. And then you can do this right after the class or on your own free time. But I I would just suggest doing it after we finish the class tonight quickly. It doesn't take long. All right, I do this every semester. I like to find out, how my students, how they feel they did, and in terms of, what was enriching for them, and what areas still need more work in terms of their own personal learning. So it's kind of useful. Okay, so that's the way we're gonna finish up the class tonight, inshallah. All right, any questions, comments, problems, issues? Oh, Nadira, sorry, your comment. How do I pull up my thing here? Okay, oops, I did it again. So during the exam, will there be a break for prayer? Yeah, we can break. It depends. I mean, some students finish by like 7:30, but I mean, the exam is only 6 to 8, so nowadays Maghrib is about 7:20, 7:25. So you can break if you'd like and come back and finish, but or you can go straight to 8 o'clock and then do your Maghrib. So I'll give you that option. It's up to you. But if you really want to take a break at 7:30 and continue after, that's fine. I mean, the exam is open book, open note anyway, so it's not like you're going to leave the computer and go cheat. There's really nothing else you can do. It's open book, open everything. So I don't really have to worry about that so much. So yeah, so we can be flexible with that. Any other questions, concerns, issues? No, you guys all look so serious today. What's going on? Is it the late semester blues or what? So are you guys like anxious to get back to campus or what? Are you happy being at home and at work and not having to come to campus?
Well, for me, I can't wait to be back at campus because I'll be more productive in the campus as compared to home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes I just make a sudden visit to libraries around my place just to get a sense of a vibe of studying because I can't do much in home basically.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people face that problem.
I heard the library is already open. They said.
UPM.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
they start on 1st of July.
Yeah, campus is open. I mean, we do see some students around, a few. I haven't seen many at our faculty, but I have seen them walking around campus. I don't know who they are, what they're doing here, but there are some. And in fact, in front of the bus stop, in front of the library, I have seen some students as well. So I think there are some students that have been given, the right to use the library. Yeah. So hopefully it won't be long. Inshallah, you guys will be back. Okay, so I'm gonna open up my slides. So tonight I'm using a program called Prezi. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Prezi. It's a little bit different than PowerPoint. It uses a little bit more motion in the presentation, which I kind of like. And then it gives you like a palette. You get to present your material on a palette format. So like for those of you who like to see like your presentation mapped out, it's kind of useful like that. I like it, so I use that one. Okay, so, all right. Can y'all see that? Okay, so guidelines for judging the quality of qualitative research. I honestly don't know how long this is going to take. We may get through this pretty quickly. It depends on you guys, really. I mean, if you guys have a lot of questions and comments, then we'll probably take a longer time. It's not a very long article. It's mostly just a checklist of guidelines. And if you go back and look at the article, you'll see that's the way it's really structured. So it's very, it's designed, it's made for students to actually apply in their studies. It's not very theoretical. But I think it covers the main the main principles and the main topics that a qualitative research study should. So I kind of like it. I think it's kind of useful. All right, so get started. Okay, so the first thing that Let's and Company, his team, the first thing they look at or they talk about is the research purpose, study purpose, really. Okay, is the study purpose, and so they get right into the purpose of the study, and they want us to reflect on whether the purpose of the study is clear, and that can be in the form of either research questions and or purpose. I think that both are important. I think it's very important to have a clear purpose of a study, as well as obviously well stated and well written research questions. Okay, so I think they're both important. And so one is the issue of relevance. Okay, so whether your topic is important. Okay, that's the first thing. Whether the topic is important, right? Whether it's relevant. Who is it important to? That's up to you to decide, to determine. In what way is it important? That's also for you to determine. Okay, but it should be relevant. And so that should be stated clearly, right? That should be stated clearly. The purpose of the study should be stated clearly, and it should be relevant. So in terms of how it's stated, it should be stated clearly in the abstract, okay? In other words, the reader shouldn't have to go looking for it. It should be clearly stated in the abstract. And then again, in more detail in the introduction, all right? So at the very beginning of your study, whether it's a thesis or an article, doesn't matter. The reader should have a clear idea of what the study is about. So yesterday I was reviewing my postdoc. He wrote a journal article, and he wrote a really long introduction. And I got to about page 3, and I still didn't really know what the study was about, because he failed to indicate up front what the purpose of the study was. So he's giving me background, but then as a reader, you get impatient and you want to know, okay, well, what is this study about? What is it that you're trying to do here? Just tell us, okay? So that should be really stated up front. So here's an example. Now you could change the word paper here and put thesis, all right? No different, right? No different. This paper aims to fill a need in literature and contribute to the knowledge base by examining the roles of adults through the lens of the adults within one example of a youth-adult partnership, okay? So this is research that I work on, but this is not my paper. This is a different paper, someone else's paper. And it's a qualitative study. It's a qualitative case study, actually. I should have put the title of the article. I apologize for that. I should have put the title of the article. So this is a qualitative case study looking at a youth-adult partnership program. All right, so this paper is rooted in our experiences as adult allies working with a team of young people in a multi-year youth participatory assessment project. All right, so it's a single project case study. In this paper, we aim to draw on our own reflections and a summary of our skills and lessons learned to add nuance and context to youth-adult partnership literature. By providing examples, vignettes, and summaries of skills and practices from our own case study, we hope to help further conceptualize the roles of adults and add to understanding the complex interactions between youth and adults that emerge within youth participation efforts. We close by offering a practical framework for conceptualizing the roles of adults for consideration based on our own perspectives and experiences. Okay, so they're doing a single case study of a youth-adult partnership. Okay, it's pretty clear. So in this paper, we aim to draw on our references. So this is all about they're using their different types of qualitative data, their own reflections, summary of their skills and lessons learned from their work, etc. Okay. Another example. The purpose of this study, this is a different study. This is related to Malaysian graduate students, in fact, foreign students, their experiences in Malaysian universities. The purpose of this study was to understand the adjustment experiences of international postgraduate students in their social and academic lives while studying at Malaysian public universities. This line of research, international student adjustment, has been vital for raising awareness of the issues faced by international students and the challenges tied to adjusting to a host country. Services for international students are developed at many universities on the basis of assumptions by staff and faculty members about the needs of international students rather than on a structured assessment of their needs. Thus, understanding adjustment among international students is vital to ensure that they obtain the best possible learning and living experience in their respective host environments. Furthermore, it is essential to expand the research base to include more qualitative studies to uncover firsthand adjustment experiences. So in this paper, this one actually we wrote, the first sentence you can see is very clear. It starts off very clear with the purpose statement. The purpose of the study is to understand the adjustment experiences. And that's a very qualitative type of statement, right? And at the last, you see at the end, it said, it provides further justification for a qualitative study. Furthermore, it's essential to expand the research base to include more qualitative studies to uncover firsthand adjustment experiences of students, right? What is it like for the students? The lived experience, okay? So that's always one of the angles of qualitative research that we want to highlight in our purpose statement, all right? So purpose of the study should be clear, right? Now, one of the things that's really interesting is that a lot of students, they have a hard time writing purpose statements. What might be some of the reasons why students have a hard time writing purpose statements? Can anyone tell me? Maybe you guys are having a hard time writing purpose statements. Why is that? Number one reason why.
Maybe you're not clear what to do in the first place because at the early stage of your research, you're not very sure about the objectives and everything.
Yeah, you yourself are not clear about the purpose.
Yeah, that is the very first, like maybe when you're given a project, but you're not sure what is actually the output, the outcome that is expected from the project. So maybe that could be a problem to write the purpose statement.
Yeah, outcome. I mean, I don't think it's as much as not knowing the outcome of the study. I think, again, it's about knowing the what it is you're studying in very straightforward, clear terms, right? That's what a purpose statement is. I mean, look at the example here, right? It's very straight to the point, very clear what this study is about. To understand the adjustment experiences of international students. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Prof, can I ask a question?
Of course.
So, are we supposed to put this purpose statement at the end of the introduction of our thesis, or is it supposed to be like in the middle or
this
right before the problem statement?
This is the end of the problem statement. This is the last part of the problem statement. Okay.
Okay.
So you identify the problem, and then at the end of the problem statement comes the purpose statement. The purpose of the study is to, and then following that will be your research questions and objectives.
Yeah, because there have been many different formats, because some universities, they have this purpose statement separate from the problem statement. So it was like, yeah,
that's right. Yeah, UPM format, they tend to like it at the end of the problem statement. I have not seen a UPM thesis with a purpose statement, but yes, there are a lot of, you see that quite a bit in the literature. Also, some university formats, they'll start the thesis with the problem statement. I've seen that as well. So, that's just all format. Whatever it is, whatever format you're using, this has to be there. The purpose statement has to be there. Let's be clear. So you need to be clear. You need to be clear about your purpose statement. And if you're not clear, that means that you're still not, in terms of your formulation of your study is still not complete, really. It's not there yet, right? And what's really ironic is that even though it looks like such a simple statement, very straightforward and so forth, sometimes it takes a long time to get there. It may take 4 or 5 semesters really just to figure out what it is that you're studying in such a concise way. I mean, in such a direct, clear way. You've gone back and forth, you've explored different topics and different layers of different topics, and you've gone into literature, looked at literature, and finally, this is what I want to study. It's sort of like, that's the process of it. Okay, but at the end of the day, it really should be this kind of Ideally, it should be this kind of a direct statement of purpose. Okay. It'll also make your research better because it'll make it clearer. And when it's clear, it's everything is done with that same goal in mind. You're not all over the place, you know. That makes a big difference. Okay, so having a clear purpose statement. Now again, these authors are they're reporting or they're speaking from the perspective of the reader. Okay, but I'm trying to also share the perspective of the researcher as well. Okay. So next one. So after the study purpose, and this is not by chapter, by the way, as you can see, they don't talk about chapters or anything. Basically, what it would be, what it would amount to is that your chapter 1, at the end of your chapter 1, in a thesis format, the reader should have a very clear idea of what the purpose of your study is. So that includes, for example, your research questions, your research objectives, you know, the significance of the study. That's all sort of part of the study purpose, right? It's all part of the main study purpose. So basically here, if we were to translate this into thesis language, it would be, study purpose would be chapter 1, right? That chapter 1 must be clear so that the reader can really ascertain a clear purpose of your study. Because that's what chapter 1 is all about, is you're stating the purpose of the study and why the study should be carried out, okay? All right, any questions about that? So I'll move on. Okay, so now we talk about literature, yeah? Literature is always an important topic, yeah? So they only cite a few things in terms of looking at, you know, the issue of real quality and so forth. When it comes to doing a quality literature review, all right? So was the relevant background literature reviewed? Now, it sounds like a very simple question. Is the background literature thoroughly reviewed? Right? Is it rigorously reviewed? Remember in previous weeks, I forgot which author it was. They talked about, it was the video. He talked about 5 quotes a week from different authors, right? In terms of compiling a literature review. So was the relevant background literature thoroughly reviewed? Okay. So in terms of qualitative and quantitative, and we have discussed this previously in the semester because it was brought up by some of you. A literature review should include both qualitative and quantitative evidence related to the study purpose. So they mentioned this as an important criteria, okay? Again, I have to reemphasize this. The idea that there's a qualitative and quantitative literature review is false. There's no such thing. You may find in some studies people reviewing only qualitative or quantitative literature, but that'd be for a purpose. There'd be a distinct purpose there. Like maybe they want to highlight the gap in the qualitative literature because they're doing a qualitative study. Doesn't mean they ignore the quantitative evidence. It just means that they're going to sort of highlight the lack of qualitative evidence or what's been done qualitatively. And that's just about segmenting your review, how you what topics and how you segment the literature review, what subtopics you use and so forth, how you organize it and all that. Okay. So you may choose to organize your literature review according to qualitative and quantitative studies. Maybe you have a reason for doing that, that's okay. But just make sure that you've thoroughly reviewed everything. Okay, that's really important. And then of course the gaps, so identifying the gaps, right? Why is it important to identify the gaps? We need to justify the need for the study. That's number 1. We also want to understand the researcher's thinking. Where is the researcher coming from? And it's kind of nice in a qualitative study, we are quite upfront about where we're coming from, right, as researchers. In chapter 3, we're very transparent in terms of our relationship to the study, relationship to the topic, the setting, the respondents, all that. So we want to understand the researcher's thinking, right? In terms of what's important to them. So that's of course related to the gap. And then this gap or these gaps should be clear and compelling. There should be a clear and compelling gap and need for the study. So here's an example, and I've highlighted this in different colors, and I'll show you why in a second. I really like this this paragraph. It's a very nice, what we'd call it, it's a sort of purpose statement or gap paragraph, whatever you want to call it. So again, it's about, as you can see at the bottom there, it's about a youth program, Young Women's Leadership Alliance, a youth adult partnerships and all-female after-school program, Journal of Community Psychology. So it says here, youth programs are cited as key contexts of development, but we know more about the participants and the programmatic content than the practices of adults who run these programs. Okay, so that's clearly a certain type of sentence statement, which I'm going to refer back to in a second. One frequently cited study describes the important role of adults in how youth participate and how they benefit from programs, and it shows that effective adults see potential rather than problems in youth. Similarly, a review of existing research suggests that successful youth workers have certain qualities. They see youth as positive contributors, they are consistent yet flexible, and they are passionate about their work. Little is known about how adult practices vary in response to gender-specific needs and interests. This article describes and evaluates an after-school leadership program for high school girls. We focus on adult practices and the unique potential of youth-adult partnerships for creating places where girls can thrive. So I've identified 4 different types of sentences in this paragraph. Okay, the first one, which just popped up on the left, is what I'm calling a declarative summary statement. Okay, so this sentence here, this sentence in yellow, is they're making a very declarative statement here. And it's a summary of the literature that's to follow. Okay, so that's a statement that's basically they're stating a position. You'd call it a thesis statement, actually. Okay, so youth programs are set as key contexts of development. Now, when you make a statement like that, you need to back it up with evidence. So this blue section here, the blue section, is them backing it up with evidence. Okay, evidence or support from literature. One frequently cited study describes blah, 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 blah. And then later, similarly, a review of existing research suggests that blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is the evidence of this. Now, here comes the gap. However, they could have written however, but they didn't. Little is known about how adult practices vary in response to gender-specific needs and interests. So we know a lot about how adults practice in terms of youth programs, youth development, and so forth, youth participation, but we don't know much in terms of gender-specific needs. So for example, the specific needs of young women or young girls in programs, right? Or how adults vary their practice according to boys or girls or whatever, okay? So that's the gap statement. Little is known about. So it's very clear, very clear. And then finally, the purpose statement. Therefore, this article describes and evaluates an after-school leadership program for high school girls. And what we're going to focus on is adult practices and the unique potential of youth adult partnerships for creating places where girls can thrive. Okay. So I really like it. It's a very concise paragraph. Everything has a purpose. The gap is clear. The purpose is clear. All right. And so a really good gap statement is like that, right? Where you're highlighting what's not known, essentially, what needs to be studied. Okay. Does everybody see? Can everybody see that? You see the structure. You see the purpose of every sentence. That's what really good.
Can I just ask another question?
Yes, please.
This reminds me of the, remember the problem statement that we have made in chapter 1. So you have to mention it again in chapter 2 where you state another time, maybe you have another additional literatures to support your thesis statement, the first line that you say just now?
Absolutely.
Or can be the improvised? Because earlier we made a problem statement early in chapter 1. So in chapter 2, this has to be stated in terms of elaboration. Okay.
Yeah, because this blue section here is just a it's just a smattering of the literature. It's not the full literature. They're just highlighting key studies, right? These are like highlights. They're not the full review. So in chapter 2, you have to give the full review. You know, like a movie trailer, right?
Mm-hmm.
The 2-minute movie trailer is like highlights of the 2-hour movie. Think of your problem statement here, this page here, as like the trailer to your literature review.
Yeah.
So basically, you're summing it up in one paragraph, but you still have to show the evidence in chapter 2.
Okay.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you know, this is a paper, it's not a thesis. So in a thesis, you may have additional issues that you're trying to get at, not just this one main issue. There may be other issues that you're trying to address in the thesis. So that will make it obviously longer. You know, you may have 3 or 4 of these kind of paragraphs because you may be dealing with, you know, 3 or 4 issues in your thesis, not just one. Right?
Okay.
Is that clear? Or?
All right, Prof. Yeah. I think I can relate better now.
Yeah. So but it's good. Once you've done the review and you're very clear about the gaps, you can write this up as sort of like an abstract for your literature review. And then you can go back and do the literature review because you see what it is you're after. You can see clearly what the goal of the review is to make this case. Okay.
Yep.
So in terms of literature, the gap must be clear, right? And don't think that it's easy. This looks like it's easy to do, but this is not easy to do. So it takes time. So don't worry about, you know, don't get frustrated. It takes time. It's not going to come, you know, overnight. All right. So that's in terms of literature review. I mean, that's in terms of quality, you know, it sounds simple, but it's not. But that's really essentially the 2 main things that they're emphasizing in this article. Okay. So now we will move on to the study design methods. Okay. And there's a lot here because, again, we're talking about a qualitative research study. And there's a lot of moving parts in a qualitative study in terms of the design and the methods. Okay. So first question is really, what is the design? How is the study being designed? Okay. Is the design explicit? Okay. So you will read some qualitative studies. And then, of course, again, transferring that back to you, whether you want to be explicit about your design, such as phenomenology and case study and grounded theory, and a phenomenological case study and you know, grounded theory case study, whatever it is you want to do. Okay, do you want to be clear and explicit about it, or do you want to do something that's less explicit? There are other designs. Now, in our course this semester, we focus on the major designs because we are in education and human resource development and so forth. So we focus on those that are most commonly used in our field. But there are many other designs in qualitative research, and you may come across some of these. These are just some. There's many others. Heuristics, ethnomethodology, which is, you'll find that it's popular among anthropologists. Institutional ethnography, hermeneutics, ecological psychology, feminism, critical theory, social interactionism. There's many others. Okay, so of course these are more from other fields, not related to our field, but you will come across these. So it's important that you decide early on. Okay, it's important you decide early on whether you want to be explicit about your design, or would you prefer something more implicit. Because you'll see in many qualitative studies, some researchers will not describe their study using these design descriptions. They may simply refer to the research as a qualitative design or general or a basic qualitative design. You'll see that it's quite common. Now, that gives you a certain freedom in the sense that you're not tied down to any of those particular traditions that we've discussed in the class. However, it creates other challenges. What might be some of the challenges it creates? Who can guess? if you're using the sort of generic qualitative design? What types of challenges does it present?
Maybe the reader of our thesis may not be able to guess until they go to the data, the results, or maybe I don't know. Maybe if you are implicit about your methods, it depends a lot on your writing style. I mean, if you're really good at explaining it,
Okay.
you may be able to convince the reader about the rigor and I mean the validity and everything in your qualitative so-called qualitative design. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think in our faculty, most of us, I have seen many of the theses, they mention it explicitly rather than implicitly, rather than, yeah. What do
So
you think, Prof?
so they infer from the design that they're doing this sort of basic qualitative, but they don't actually come out and say it. Is that what you mean? Hey, is Filza still there? Are you still there, Filza?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I'm listening.
Yeah. So is that what you mean, that they
Yeah.
imply a basic qualitative design, but they don't actually say it?
Yeah, but I've
No.
seen the one that I've seen so far. Actually, they did mention it,
Oh.
but I think a lot of theses from overseas, other countries,
They don't.
they do have this implicit way of qualitative design.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Thank you. That's good. You hit on I think a few very important things. One is writing and how it's presented. Yeah. Before we even get to that, I would say, okay, if you're going to do a basic qualitative design, how do you decide how to collect your data? How do you decide how to analyze your data? How do you decide what kind of reporting you want to do? What kind of finding you want to produce at the end of the study? How do you justify the link between the types of research questions you're asking with the design that you are going to be using? So all those things have to be thought out. So you can do basic quality design, no problem. Many people do. But if you do a basic quality of design and you choose to use open axial and selective coding according to grounded theory, you have to ask the question, why? Why are you using that approach to data analysis, which implies a sort of grounded theory output or production of data? Why are you using this? So you need to think that through. Or are you just going to do a sort of generic thematic analysis, which is fine as well? You know, you want to produce themes, right? Or you're going to do a more of a descriptive content analysis, right? Why? You know, so it's. I think some people think that it's an easier way out if they do it that way, but it actually isn't, because every step still has to be thought out, and every approach that you use has to be justified throughout the process. Okay. So you're perfectly allowed to do it. And like if you follow, like, say, Sharon Mariam's book, you know, you could follow her book A to Z, and then she describes how to do coding, categorizing, and all that, you know. But again, Sharon Mariam is she's actually a case study scholar. So even though she talks about basic qualitative research, she's very much influenced by a case study approach, you know. So you can say I'm using a basic qualitative design that is influenced by a case study approach, because ABC or XYZ or whatever your reasons are. Okay, and I've seen that on many occasions. You declare basic qualitative approach, but then you mention that you've got certain influences on your choice of methods, right? Because of whatever reasons. You know, maybe you're doing a basic qualitative research study, but you're very much interested in explaining people's experiences similar to a phenomenological study. So, you know, you're using some of the techniques of phenomenology, for example, and stuff like that, okay? The point is that whichever one you choose, whether explicit or implicit, you have to justify what you're doing and why. Okay? And you need to know, you need to be clear, right? You should know, right? Okay, so explicit or implicit. And then the appropriateness. Choice of qualitative research designs should be congruent with the following, okay? So there's a few things to consider in terms of choosing a design. One is your own beliefs and worldviews, okay? Qualitative researcher usually expresses an interest in understanding the social world from the point of view of participants, okay? And emphasizes the context in which events occur and have meaning. So most researchers, they do qualitative research because of this reason. They want to understand the social world from the point of view of the participants, right? That's far and away the, one of the main reasons why people choose to do qualitative research. Okay, so you may be a very theoretical person. You have this desire and this belief that all research should produce a theory. So you're doing grounded theory. It's in line with your beliefs and your worldview. You're a very phenomenological person. You're a psychologist, or something, So that's influencing your choice, right? So that's one of the reasons that makes, I think, that qualitative research is so interesting, is that it's very personal. The choices that you make and how you design the study are very personal, which is kind of neat.
Prof, can we mention about the theoretical framework as well in the, justifying since we are talking about the design, so of course we have to refer back to the theoretical framework that we have chosen for our study, or maybe that is too early, if that is to be included.
Theoretical framework is coming up. It's coming up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but that's definitely consideration, no doubt. Okay, the nature of the end results desired. Okay, and we've mentioned this also. Thinking about what you want to produce at the end of the study, right? And of course, again, qualitative researchers are influenced by the desire to seek meaning and understanding. Okay, and that's often best described in narratives, stories, and anecdotes, and vignettes, and people's accounts of things, how they describe their lives, and so forth. All right, so that's also driving your design choice. The depth of understanding and description required. Okay, so qualitative research usually involves the exploration of a topic or issue in depth, with emphasis on seeking information from the people who are experiencing or involved in the issue. As we all know, we should know that a goal of qualitative research is depth of understanding. Right now, that's going to vary according to research tradition. Grounded theory, for example, when you're trying to come up with a theory, it's going to look very different than if you're doing a phenomenological study where people are talking about, trauma that they've experienced in their lives. The level of depth will be different, and it'll look different because a phenomenological study is all about describing the lived moment, the lived experience. Whereas grounded theory, you're trying to come up actually with a generalized sort of finding that is not necessarily that in depth. It's more conceptual. Sorry, my computer battery is dying. Hold on. Come on, come back on. Okay. Right. So again, what are you after? What are you looking for? Are you looking for depth of understanding? Are you looking for description? Are you looking for a conceptual kind of finding? Right. These are really the questions that we need to ask ourselves at the beginning of our study, rather than later. Okay. Don't oh, I'm going to do case study just because it seems like the easiest to do. Then you get your finding and you realize you didn't really do a case study. It's kind of late, right? So think about that at the beginning, earlier on in the study. And lastly, the type of reasoning involved. Qualitative research is oriented towards theory construction, and the reasoning behind data analysis is inductive. Okay, so typically most of the work in qualitative research is inductive work. It's not deductive. Although, as we've mentioned in the class, there are times where you will use deduction, right? You can use deduction in terms of your analysis. You can bring in pre-existing codes and so forth from the literature, but most of the work is going to be inductive. It's going to be exploratory. It's going to be based on the individual experiences that you come across, with an aim to conceptualizing those experiences into knowledge, trying to generate knowledge that way, right? Using an inductive approach. So the type of reasoning is mainly inductive, right? You're not testing really qualitative research. So again, that's going to affect your design decision as well. That's definitely going to affect your design, because you may choose a topic where there's pretty rich literature, and you might be tempted to use a deductive approach to your analysis, right? With all those pre-existing, all those juicy pre-existing concepts that you come across in the literature, you may have the desire to use those to guide your analysis or conduct your coding and so forth. So that's, you know, or do you want to be completely inductive? Like so inductive, you're going to be like, I'm not even going to do a literature review. I'm just going to go out in the field and start collecting data and woohoo, see what I get. It's like total induction. Okay, so another consideration for your design. All right, so these are some of the things that he or she, Let's and company, they mention in terms of design decisions. Yeah, appropriateness. Is the design appropriate? So now we look at theoretical perspectives. Okay. So they asked the question in terms of quality: is a theoretical perspective identified? Is there some sort of theoretical framework or guiding theory mentioned in the study? Okay. So they say the researcher should know something conceptually of the phenomenon of interest and should state the theoretical perspective up front. Okay. So I kind of like the way they word that. The researcher should know something conceptually of the phenomenon of interest. In other words, you know, you're not looking for a really complex theoretical description of what you're studying necessarily, because the idea is that you want to do an exploratory study. You want to discover new things, which may not already exist in terms of a well laid out theory, right? But there should be something related to your topic conceptually that you can use to as a guide, yeah. And so that should be stated somewhere up front. That should be stated up front. And we've discussed that quite a bit, I think, this semester. All right. All right, and then of course the methods. So you have your core methods, right? The core methods, which I'm going to just touch on again. And there are other methods. These are the main sort of methods that we use to collect our data. So starting with observations. So if you're going to use participant observation, we should know that participant observation is useful when the focus of interest is how activities and interactions within a setting give meaning to beliefs or behaviors. Okay, so it's that linkage, it's that link between people's manifested behavior and the internal meanings that people attach to those behaviors, right? Which is why you will rarely ever see a qualitative research study that's based only on observation. You will, I promise you will never see it, because there's really no point, unless it's some sort of experimental study, which may combine may have a qualitative component to it. But typically in qualitative research, we do observation because we want to pair it up with, we want to do it in combination with those more intrinsic methods like interview, for example, because we want both. We want to understand how a set of behaviors is understood, is explained, and so forth. Okay, so it's considered the qualitative method of choice when the situation or issue of interest is obscured or hidden from public knowledge, and there are differences between what people say and what people do, right? So if you really want to get to the, you know, there's this issue in the school, you know, word is that teachers are doing this or students are doing this, right? So let's study it using a participant observation approach where we can really observe and study behavior systematically over a period of time to really arrive at some conclusion in terms of what's actually happening here. Okay, and that's sort of the idea. So it's really useful in certain types of studies, right? When you're after certain types of meaning that is linked to behavior or interaction. Okay. I'm just curious, is anybody in the class planning on using observation in your thesis? I don't know if I've ever asked that question before. Anyone planning on using observation in your study? Yeah, it's funny. UPM, we don't get a whole lot of students that use observation, at least systematically. Like we get some students that they mention that they did observation, but when it comes down, when we sort of read and then we ask them, and then and when it comes down to it, they actually don't really do observation. Huh? Did someone say something? Or was that just feedback?
I think
I
it's just a
think
noise.
Oh, someone did mute their microphone.
It's Kak Filza.
Oh, it's Vincent. So nobody in the class doing observation. Okay, just curious. Okay, and then interviews, the next one. So,
Prof,
yeah, I'm on.
sorry, back to the observation part.
Yeah.
In my case, I am studying halal executives in their respective industry. So I was initially I was thinking on doing observations towards them, how they behavior in the industry and whatnot, and how they deal with people, especially their supervisors or their relevant departments or people from the outside. But I think my how do I put this? My existence during the process will jeopardize the nature of the workplace of the industry. How do you, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, and that's always a concern when you talk about observation, because there is a chance that could happen. And usually, typically, qualitative researchers overcome that by spending long periods of time at the setting. So like, it's pretty much understood that if you go into a setting as an observer, as a researcher, that of course early on people are going to be kind of ruffled by your presence there, and like, what's this guy doing, and why is he asking me questions, and what does he want? Why is he always in our meetings, and stuff like that. But the idea is that after a while people will stop caring, be like, oh, this guy again. After a while they won't even realize you're there. Sort of like, you just become sort of like a fly on the wall. And then at that point, that is where you really get the good natural data. So typically and you have to use your discretion. I mean, you can sort of you can sort of judge how people behave around you. So like after the first few days, or maybe even first couple of weeks, it may seem weird. They may suspicious, or after a while, you'll start to see sort of a regular pattern of behavior, and at that point, you can pretty much conclude that they've gotten used to you and they don't really care you're there. But yeah, and that's the thing about observation, is that it's field work, so you really need to be able to get continuous access to the place over at least a decent period of time. If you can't get that, then there's really no point to doing observations, unless it's like an event, like a big event where it's out in public and no one knows you're there anyway. Things like that, it's fine. You can do it in shorter period of time. But if you're doing an intensive observation, then definitely you need that time for people to get acquainted with you. So I don't know what kind of relationship you have with the organization, Amar.
as for now, I don't really have like professional relationship, but I do engage with them, so they are aware that I'm going to be there
Oh,
to perform my research. And another concern is, Prof, do we have cases that previously, during this whole period of observations, there is nothing much that can be seen, and how do we go about it in reporting that?
can you ask that again? I didn't quite understand.
Okay. Do we have cases previously, after this whole period of time, during observation time, and we pretty much didn't manage to acquire relevant data to our
Oh,
research? And how do we go about that on reporting it?
that's interesting. Why would you say that there's no relevant data coming out?
As we were discussing earlier, maybe they can be pretentious during my existence, and some of the processes I may or may not be able to access, for instance,
Oh, right.
uh,
Yeah, that's
or
access.
other extraneous problems that may be faced. So how do we go about that? Even though I've been, for example, I've been observing around 6 months of time, and then nothing much can be seen or nothing much can be collected. And how do we go about that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Okay, a few things I would say. First is try to get a sense before you start the study. Try and get a sense of that early on. So like what kind of relationship do you have with them? Are they really willing to let you observe, or is it just like, they're kind of like hesitant, but okay, what kind of access are they going to give you? You should know early on whether you're going to get access to what you need to get access to. So you should kind of clear that with them before you start, if possible. Just sort of come to an agreement, and you can even write it up in like a consent form kind of thing, where both parties sign, so that there's not, there's no contentious issues like, they get offended by you observing a meeting or something like that. So it's sort of agreed upon early. I think that would be a really important step to getting some of those issues out of the way before you start. And then, of course, you as the researcher need to be clear about what you're observing, what you plan to observe. Don't go in and just say, well, I'm going to go in there and just see what's going on. And, if something looks interesting, I'll observe. It doesn't work that way. In research, you have to be focused. So I'm observing, interactions between top management and their subordinates, or a certain group of subordinates, or I'm observing learning processes. I'm observing communication between staff A and staff B. Or, you're going in and you're looking for a specific thing, and you're observing that, and you've already been told you have access to that. That's the best you can do. After that, whatever happens, happens. And sometimes things in the field don't work out. So there's nothing, there's no harm in that per se. Only that, of course, it's in terms of the overall study, in terms of the quality of your data, maybe not as good. And you just report it. And then that happens a lot, actually. In fact, I was going to do a study on a very contentious issue related to religion. I won't say what it is. And I got approval before I applied for the grant. I got approval, verbal approval I got from the authorities at JAIS in Selangor. We applied for the grant. We got the grant. When the grant came, we were ready to start the study. They said, oh, sorry, we're not going to give you access. Oh, boy. That's like, oh, no, now what do we do? So we had to change. Yeah, you have to change we had to change the method. We were going to do a qualitative study, and we had to change to a quantitative study with a less sensitive kind of topic. We had to water down the topic, basically, because we got the grant. We had the money. We had to do something. So these things, they happen. In research, it's not all under your control. So just do the best you can, and make whatever adjustments you have to make. It's understood in research that happens. Qualitative researchers there's no problem in being transparent, explaining what happened. No problem. I was originally going to do interviews, or I was originally going to do observation, but this happened, that happened, and then I decided instead to do document analysis. Right? Because the reader may say, well, why didn't you do observation? You know, it would have made sense for you to do observation in this kind of study, right? I mean, you have to sort of think about from the reader's perspective what they're going to say, you know, and then you can, and you can even mention in chapter 3, I was originally planning to do observation, but I couldn't get access to this person or these people, so I resorted to document analysis with the known limitations that I wouldn't be getting that first-hand data or something like that. You can certainly say that. It's no problem. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Sure. All right, next one, documents. Document review or analysis is flexible and open. The purpose is to learn how past intentions and events were related due to their meaning and value. Okay, so documents typically will refer to past events. Sometimes they're really past events, like they're considered archives, archival data, like old documents or historical documents, stuff like that. Or they may just be recent past, like, past 5 years, past 10 years, what do they call? Year-end reports or annual reports, stuff like that. Meeting minutes. There's so many different types of documents, but they're all pretty much from past events. So we have to link them to the meaning of the study in its current, how it's taking place currently, right? How it's unfolding currently. So typically, documents will explain previous behavior, maybe leading up to what you're studying now, right? So you're trying to explain, like, I have a student, she's about to go for a Viva. I'm a co-supervisor. She's from the Faculty of Bahasa and Communication. And I think I've mentioned her study before, but she's doing that case study on Bernama TV. So she's doing a case study of a crisis that took place in the TV, in that TV production company. So she has documents that she was given because she was an employee there. She has documents related to what happened during the crisis. Now, of course, she's explaining the crisis now after it happened. It happened several years ago, but she's using those documents to understand now what happened back then in terms of what was the meaning of this crisis in relation to leadership communication. That's her study, what it's about, right? And so even her interviews she's doing now with people that were there at the time. So they're telling her about what happened and what they think it means and all that. But she's also drawing on those documents to better explain, triangulating it with the interview data and so forth to explain what happened and why. All right, so she's sort of using it as a link. Documents are reviewed considering the context within which they were created. The historian learns about particular persons at particular times and places that present unique opportunities to learn about the topic of interest. I mean, people that really like I love history, so I love the fact that you can, I love when you review documents and they reveal things about people that were going on at that time. And that's really how qualitative researchers also use documents. Like, oh, at this time, 5 years ago or 7 years ago, the company was doing really well, but then why were so many people leaving the company, right? And then you're going to interview the people and find out why they left the company and so forth. So it enriches the story behind the study. It requires the researcher to enter into an in-depth learning process to become a critical editor of texts such as diaries, media reports, or blogs. So nowadays, document analysis is also what you read on the internet. Websites, blogs, Facebook, Twitter feeds, it's all document analysis now, right? And allows you to become a critical editor of those texts. Diaries, online diaries, blogging, and all that. That's all document analysis. Tells us a lot. It tells us a lot. I mean, if you look at the literature nowadays, there's all the time they're producing studies now on, Facebook and looking at Facebook dialogue, and I mean, it's really interesting research. But yeah, so that's all considered document review or document analysis. Oh, this chat. I didn't see the chat. I see some questions here. Okay. So Fiza, you have a question. A friend of mine shared current MOE policy is not very supportive in terms of in-class or school observation. Let me find the related. Oh, yeah, especially government. I mean, in general, I think a lot of organizations are hesitant to let people observe them. So you need to, what I have found is that students that have done observation are typically those that have pre-existing relationships with the organizations. So those organizations, they have a certain level of trust with those people. They tend to allow them to observe. But strangers, they usually have a hard time getting access to observation, especially in Malaysia. One thing
Prof,
you
can
can,
I,
yeah,
sorry,
go ahead, Arman.
can I respond to Kak Filza documents? Actually, I've experienced related to requesting for permissions from the parents of the students because during my undergraduate study, I visited Australia, a kindergarten, to perform sort of like community work. And although we got permission from the administration of the kindergarten, actually during the interview with the kids and also documentations, for instance, pictures and video, um, it requires another documentations or another permission from the parents. So because of these incidents, which apparently we did not be informed early on, so some of the parents came to the school because maybe they observed from the CCTV, I'm not sure. They came to the school and pick up their children because of these incidents. So I think this kind of thing could be happening in Malaysia according
Oh,
to this.
yeah, thank you, Amar. It's a very big issue now, especially when it deals with children, because of all the, all the online and pedophilia and child pornography, and people are very sensitive about that. And there's legal ramifications of all that. So yeah, the ministry has to be very careful now with all those things. Anything related to children in schools is quite restrictive. And so again, as a researcher, you have to plan ahead. Feasibility. Remember, we always talk about feasibility of a study is always one of the first things you consider. Is this study feasible? Especially the way you've designed it. You may have designed a fantastic study, but it's just not feasible. You just cannot get access, the kind of access that you need, right? But that's one thing that's nice about qualitative research, though, is that it's, like for example, studying your workplace. In a quantitative study, people will be more, critics will be more inclined to call you out for bias, potential bias, than you would in a qualitative study. Like you're a qualitative researcher and you're going to study your own workplace. Qualitative research is no big deal. No big deal. Of course, you have to be aware of all the potential biases and you have to be upfront about all that, blah, blah, blah. But there's really no big deal. And it allows you a certain type of access that you probably wouldn't be able to get if you went to some random organization. So I think people, you can take advantage of those things. Like if you really want to do a study that's in your own workplace or in your own neighborhood or in your own, a community where an organization where you volunteer or something, take advantage of those opportunities because you might get access there that you wouldn't get otherwise. All right. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's move. Okay, and the last one, FGD. So of course, focus groups are useful when multiple viewpoints or responses are needed on a specific topic or issue. Group members can build on one another's ideas to result in more in-depth discussion of the topic. All right, so in the past, we've mentioned about the benefits, really unique benefits of focus groups. What happens when you get a group of people in a room talking about an issue or an experience or something. It can result in a very nice in-depth discussion. And of course, researchers also observe the interactions that occur. As a youth researcher, I would just, for those of you who are involved in studies with young people, whether it's youth or children or teenagers, I would be careful about doing focus groups, only because you can do them, only that you have to bear in mind for younger people, they are much more easily influenced by others, right? So like peers, right? So it's a lot harder to get, it's often harder to get viewpoints that are really authentic because they tend to be influenced by their peers, right? I think it's true of anybody, even adults, but it's less true of adults. Adults tend to be more willing to be autonomous and speak independently than young people tend to be. However, the other ironic thing is, the other thing I found though is that when it comes to surveying, doing surveys, I've found that youth tend to be very honest on surveys. So it's very interesting, you know, the different dynamics of the different ways of collecting data with different groups. Here's Nora with a question. I have done observation for my data collection with government officers. Most importantly, you must have supporting document, such as university research etiquette to gain access for observation. In addition, building reputation is important as well, is important. Building reputation with them. Yeah, building relationship. Yeah, rapport. Yeah, I mean, that's, again, going back to our epistemology as qualitative researchers, building rapport is really important. So it's also important in doing observations, absolutely. Thank you for that, Nora. That's a good point. So supporting documentation, yeah, of course, you need to show that you're authentic, that you're from the university, that you have the university's, you know, that's why we have, one of the reasons why we have these ethical clearance forms now, process and forms, that we can show people. That also helps, especially when you're dealing with government or other types of organizations. Okay, so those are the core methods of collecting data. So they should be adequately described in your chapter 3. Sampling, okay. Was the process of purposeful sampling or purposeful selection, purposive sampling also called, was it described well with a lot of detail, etc.? Okay. So these are some of the things to consider, all right? It's just a sort of smattering of points here. The sampling method needs to fit the study purpose, okay? So whatever the purpose of your study is, it should match. The sampling method you're using should match. So if you're doing a case study, sampling means what in a case study? We've talked about the 2 types of sampling in a case study. Who can tell me? It's a good exam question. What are the 2 types of sampling in a case study?
Snowball, one of them.
That is, yeah, that is an approach to sampling. Sorry, maybe my question was not worded very well. In a case study, there's 2 levels of sampling. Sorry. Not types of sampling. Because what you mentioned is a type of sampling. 2 levels of sampling. Who remembers the 2 levels of sampling in a case study?
Is it stratified sampling and the cluster sampling?
No, those are quantitative methods of sampling, not qualitative methods. Think about a case study, right? What's unique about a case study?
Oh, okay, I know. First, we have to identify which organizations that we want to do sampling. And then afterwards, we have to identify who are the ones in that particular organizations we have to do our data collection. Is it?
Yeah, you basically got it. But not every case study is. But not every case study is an organization. Remember, cases are not necessarily organizations. But yeah, it's defining the case, sampling the case, choosing the case, and then within the case, who is your sample within the case, right? So if you are doing an organization, which organization is the first level of sampling, and then within that organization, who are you going to actually sample? for the study. Okay, so 2 levels. So your method of sampling should match the study purpose. You know, obviously, if you want to understand, you want to do a retrospective study on the meaning of Merdeka among older Malaysians. Obviously, your sampling method is not going to include 15 to 25-year-olds. Okay, that's a pretty dumb example, but it's that kind of a thing, right? Your sample should match the purpose of the study. Samples should be described in such a way that the reader understands the key characteristics of the participants involved. Okay, so description, describe your sample well. Okay, probably more so than you would in a quantitative study, describing the sample well. Okay, purposeful sampling selects participants for a specific reason. Okay, also known as criteria or criterion-based sampling. Okay, so you should be explicit about the, you know, what were the criteria for choosing your sample. Okay, was informed consent obtained? So that's related to ethics, but this is the ethics of sampling. When you do your sampling, did you get informed consent, and how did you get it? And nowadays, there's also verbal informed consent. Like sometimes researchers will either forget to bring consent forms, or they are afraid that the participants won't be willing to sign the consent forms, or you know, that kind of thing. You can get consent verbally on the audio or video file. If you're doing a video, you can ask them on the video or on the audio if they consent to the interview, and explain to them everything that's in the form basically, but you just do it verbally. That may be acceptable in a situation where you cannot get a consent form signed because it's considered to be too sensitive or whatever, or it's awkward. The sampling process should be flexible, evolving as the study progresses. So qualitative research, our sampling is flexible. You want to change directions in the middle of the study, you want to bring in new people, you want to bring in a new group of participants, all that is fine, it's acceptable. Of course, it has to have a purpose, but it's all acceptable. Okay, flexible process. Sampling was done until redundancy in data was reached. Okay, also known as
Saturation.
Thank you. Thank you. I was ready to finish the class right there. Just close up shop. Yeah, data redundancy. So again, we've gone over this, the different terms, the slight differences in conceptually also. What is data redundancy versus data saturation? One is conceptual, one is based on more of the raw data. Okay, but basically, what did you use as your criteria for deciding on a sample size? All right. So these are the things that I think in terms of quality that we really want to emphasize in a qualitative study, things that you need to keep in mind when you go to write your study. Okay, and now onto data collection. All right, so there's two main issues with quality and data collection: descriptive clarity and then procedural rigor. Okay, so was there descriptive clarity? Were there clear and complete descriptions? Okay. The reader should have a sense of personally experiencing the event or the phenomenon being studied. The phenomenon should be, you know, described in such a way that the reader is really familiar with it. So like the Bernama example I gave before, Bernama TV crisis that my student studied, she has to first, before she really goes into the study, she has to first, before she goes into her methodology, she has to first explain to us what this crisis was all about, what happened, right? Very descriptively, so that we can really put ourselves there. Oh, wow, this is a real crisis. This is really serious, you know? Otherwise, well, what's the point of doing this study? Why is this event so important, right? So that can only be done through a clear and complete description, right? A vivid description. So you see there, a vivid but concise description of the participants. The site and the researcher should provide the reader with an understanding of the whole picture of the topic or phenomenon of interest, okay? So rich description is very important in the methods. So describe your participants, describe the site, describe the case, describe the event, whatever it is, it should be well described. Researcher includes relevant information about the participants, okay? So whatever, you know, again, this is your discretion, how much information is relevant, but you can use previous studies to get an idea about that. But there should be enough information about the participants. Documentation of the researcher's credentials and previous experience in observation, interviewing, and communication should be provided. Okay, so here we get into the positionality statement. Researcher's instrument, okay, your own background, your own experience. Okay, you see that the researcher's roles, the level of participation, and relationship with participants also needs to be described as they can influence the findings. Okay, so this is of particular importance for a thesis. Nowadays, a lot of journal articles you'll see qualitatively, they don't include a whole lot of information about their own role in the project and so forth. They don't really, positionality is not something that's discussed too much in the journal literature, unless it's a qualitative journal. But for a thesis, that definitely has to be there. Definitely has to be there, okay? And then procedural rigor. Was the data collection carried out using the appropriate procedures? Okay, so you need to describe your procedures. How did you go about collecting your data? Okay, including the issues of gaining access to the site. Did you have to go through gatekeepers, right, etc.? The data collection methods. Well, what did you do? Interviews, observation, blah, blah, blah. Did you have to train anyone? Did you use transcribers, right? Length of time spent gathering the data. You did observations. How long did you observe? How often did you go to the site? How long did you spend there, right? Did you just observe? Did you do interviews as well while you observed? Did you do impromptu interviews? You know, how did you record your observations? All that detail, okay, and the amount of data collected. All right, so it all should be detailed out. The procedures are very important. Again, because every qualitative study is unique, and the idea is that the whole point of a methodology chapter is to make it replicable so that somebody else can take your methodology chapter and then conduct the study the same way. That's the idea of any scientific study, the idea behind a methods section. So it has to be detailed. All right, so those are the two main critical issues in terms of data collection for ensuring quality. Okay, so these are the main design issues that they touch on in the paper. Shafiq has a, oh, I've already applied this to it. Okay, you're talking about the, yeah, school management. Yeah, there's many layers you have to go through to get approval to do research in schools, and at the end of the day, the school itself has the right to say no, even if the ministry approves. So that's just something to keep in mind for those of you who are doing research in schools. Okay, and data analysis. Okay, three main issues to consider: analytical rigor. Okay, so the findings were consistent with and reflective of the data. Codes, categories, and themes developed by the researcher should be logically consistent and reflective of the data. Oops, I got cut off there. The reader should be able to identify and describe the methods used in the study of interest and make a judgment as to whether the methods are appropriate given the purpose of the study. Okay, was the data analysis inductive? All right. So was the analysis rigorously done? Okay. Is there adequate data? You know, in some studies there isn't. There's a lot of discussion by the researcher, sort of giving their own interpretation and whatnot, but there's a lack of data. Okay, so there's, you know, it depends. You can, there's no formula for it, but there should be adequate data displayed in the write-up. Auditability. Was there a decision also known as an audit trail developed? Okay, was the process of analyzing the data described adequately? This is a big problem. And going back to our discussion on saturation and then illustrating your analysis that you did, using examples. We've talked a lot about this semester. The code book, right? Using the code book, but really showing and illustrating your process of analysis as best you can. You know, just showing examples, maybe using the appendix, but really giving the reader a good sense of how you analyze your data. The rationale for development of themes. So how did you arrive at your themes? Okay, so all that should be described. And making theoretical connections. Did a meaningful picture of the phenomenon under study emerge? Okay. So at the end of the day, you want to end up with a nice picture of this phenomenon that you're studying, you know. And so did that picture, that meaningful picture, emerge at the end of the day? Or are you left with a whole bunch of like random categories that there's no real rhyme or reason to them? It's just like a list of categories and you can't make any connections between them. And, you know, theoretically, you don't really know how they relate. And so that's a sign that you haven't really done enough analysis, you know, or you haven't collected enough data. You know, that could also be the issue. But this meaningful picture should emerge as a result of the study, all right? So that's an important indicator of that. All right, is be able to make theoretical connections. All right, so that's those are all the main design issues. Okay, so overall rigor, this is critical in qualitative analysis, qualitative research, right? So do you have evidence of the 4 components of trustworthiness? Okay, so credibility. Does a true, and I put true in quotes because qualitatively we know that true here means it's more of a subjective, localized true. It's not true with a capital T, of course, but is there a true picture of the data that's emerged? So are descriptions and interpretations of experiences recognizable? Do they ring true? Does the evidence present a true depiction of what is happening in the setting? In other words, does the reader really get a sense of what's happening in the setting by reading your findings? Okay. Is there a extensive description along with the sufficient evidence? And do those 2 things match? Do they align to give an overall picture of the phenomenon? Okay. So how do we ensure this? Okay, some of the ways: prolonged engagement helps us to ensure that. Triangulation helps us to ensure that. Okay, so if you're getting, you know, you're doing triangulation, you're getting different findings using different methods, findings that you can't really explain, that don't relate to one another somehow, it's gonna make it difficult for you to present this sort of picture of what's happening, right? Reflexivity is another way to ensure that there's this true picture results. And then memory checking. Memory checking is a very important one, especially for certain types of studies. You actually have the participants, they will help you to tell you whether, you know, you've captured the phenomenon, you know, accurately. Okay, so credibility is really about, I mean, we think about the word credibility, is it credible? Is it believable? Do we get a sense that the way you've portrayed the phenomenon is really true to its to the way it's really happening, the way it's really occurring? Okay, all that. Sorry. Okay, second one is transferability. Can the findings be transferred to other settings? Are the participants and setting described in enough detail? All right. Can the concepts and theory developed be applied to the reader's context? So here, really, again, we've discussed this, I think, before, but the onus here is not necessarily on you so much. You're responsible for the first one in describing in lots and lots of detail about your setting, about your participants, and so forth, so that others can read it and then they can apply it to their setting. Okay. If you don't provide them with enough detail and description, they're not going to know or be able to determine whether they can apply the findings to their own particular situations. All right. So that's why detailed description, rich description is so important in a qualitative study, to make it transferable and make it useful for others, right? Reuser or reader generalizability, another word for it. Dependability. is there consistency between the data and the findings? Okay, so the process must be clearly defined. How you went from data collection to analysis to interpretation. And then that will help to determine whether there's consistency between the data and the findings. So for example, you often will read, or not often, sorry, I will often read, you guys won't, but I will often read students presenting work where they arrive at a finding, they have a certain theme that they've arrived at, but the data, the evidence that they've provided there doesn't match the finding. There's a disconnect there between the process of data collection, analysis, and interpretation. In other words, the data they've collected, somehow the way it's been interpreted is way off, way off. They can't explain it. They just cannot explain the connection between the two. So there's a disconnect there. There's a problem there in this process of going from data collection to interpretation. The analysis process has some flaws in it somewhere. That's a lack of dependability. We call that dependability in the language of validity and reliability in qualitative research. So two ways of addressing this, or one is audit trail. An audit trail is, again, a detailed explanation of the process. So all those little excerpts showing how you did coding and how you went from codes to categories and categories to finding, themes or whatever, findings, how you wrote it up. All of that description of how you did that is your audit trail. Okay, so that'll explain, that'll show how you arrived at your findings. So from there, you should be able to identify where you went wrong. Okay, that's number one. Number two is peer review. You should be having others looking at these processes. Ideally, as students, your committee members or somebody in your committee should be helping you to go through your analysis process to determine whether you're on the right track. Okay, to determine whether there is that sort of consistency between the data and the interpretation or the finding. Okay, so this consistency between them is very important. So this is what we call dependability, qualitative research. And the last of the four is confirmability. Right? And these are the strategies that we use to limit bias. Okay, and I like this quote they make here. They say the data, neutrality of the data, not the researcher, because we acknowledge as qualitative researchers that we're not without bias. We are with bias. We come to the study with bias, but we don't let that bias, our own bias about the topic, our views on the subject, the topic, we don't let that bias the data, right? That's what's important. So the data remains neutral. Okay, so how do we ensure that? That's where confirmability comes in. So researchers log. Are you logging all these biases? Are you writing about them? Are you being upfront about them? Are you being clear about your own biases? Right. Again, peer review. Are others making you aware of when you're being biased? Okay. Checking with experts. Right. For example, if you send your interview transcript to someone who's really well versed in qualitative research, they can tell just by the questions you're asking whether your biases are getting in the way of your data collection. Okay, and then of course member checking another way. Okay, so we need strategies to limit our different biases. Okay, and to ensure that those biases are not influencing the data. Okay, because they're going to influence the study. We've already acknowledged that. We're upfront about that in our positionality statement. Okay, so the four components of trustworthiness. Okay, it's really, these are really important that you illustrate. Now, of course, you don't have to mention. It's good in a thesis if you can mention all four of these. It's fantastic. But you can talk about trustworthiness in general in your chapter 3, and just mention some of the approaches that you use to ensure trustworthiness in general. You don't have to necessarily go into all four specifically, but of course, if you do, it's better. It's always better if you do. It just shows that you're being more rigorous in carrying out the process. And last, since we're almost done, we're not gonna have a break. We'll just finish up straight away. Conclusions, okay? Were the conclusions of the study appropriate given the findings, all right? So was there a clear contribution to theory development or new knowledge, practice, etc.? Okay, so these things need to be clear, all right? And you should, I mean, ideally, you know, a good study has very clear conclusions, right? Again, if your conclusions are not clear, maybe you need to take a break. Maybe you need to, you know, get away from your study for a week and then go back to it, because maybe it's just not, it's not fresh in your mind. What are the conclusions of my study, right? And conclusions are different, right? So results versus discussion versus conclusion. I like this answer. This was on ResearchGate. I found this on ResearchGate. Somebody asked this question: what's the difference between results, discussion, and conclusion? And there were hundreds of responses, but this guy sort of summarized them all up. So in the results section, the results is simply what you found. Okay, so your chapter 4, your results is going to be what you found, basically your themes, okay, or your whatever model theory, whatever you come up with, that's your result. Discussion is we try to explain what the results mean, okay, and how that relates to the literature, how the findings relate to the literature. Okay, so it goes beyond just presenting the finding, where you begin to say, okay, so what do these themes mean? Okay, and then how do they relate to previous studies? Are they new? Are they old? Are they richer? Are they, you know, what's the relationship? Similarities, differences, etc. The conclusion, this guy, Mahmoud, Dr. Mahmoud, he says, restate the main points in a new concise way that you want your readers to remember. Very nice. What do you want the reader to take home with them? Look, they just read 250 pages of your study. They're not going to remember everything. What are the key elements that you want them to take home, to take back with you or with them? Okay, I like that. That's a very good way of putting it. So the conclusions is like, ultimately, people should know or should remember that this study found A, B, and C. Boom, boom, boom. That's the conclusion. Okay. Of course, it's going to be a bit longer than that, not so concise as that, but that's essentially what it is. It's the takeaway. It's the take home. What are people going to take away with them from reading your study? Okay. So the results is a very long section. It's all the detail of the data and the theme and what you found, blah, blah, blah. The discussion is where you do a lot of the intellectual work, right? Intellectual work. The deeper meaning behind the themes and then how they relate to the literature. That's the scholarship part, right? Where you are playing the role of the scholar now. Okay, based on what previous scholars have written about this topic, this is what I found, and this is what I found. Similarities, differences, extension here, extension there, etc. And then finally, the conclusion is what is the main takeaway for the reader. Okay, so make sure that there's differences between these three. You know, don't just repeat the results in the discussion and then the conclusion just repeat it again. And we've seen that from students. You know, they can't delineate the difference between the result, the discussion, and the conclusion. And in all honesty, I think it really helps to get people's feedback about writing these last, especially the discussion and the conclusion. You know, using a peer reviewer is really good. You know, going to your supervisor and saying, you know, I've done all this work and I just cannot glean what are the main conclusions of my study. Getting a fresh perspective sometimes helps, especially if you've already written the discussion. You know, your supervisor can read the results, read the discussion, and then help you to sort of formulate some conclusions. It's quite common to get stuck at that point, in all honesty. I myself also tend to get stuck in writing conclusions. Okay. So, but those should be clear, especially in a good study. They should be clear. All right. And that is all, folks, in the words of Bugs Bunny. That's all, folks.
Prof, I have a question.
Questions? Yeah.
Okay. I read
Amar, you froze. You're frozen. What happened? We're having a connection issue. Amar, are you there, Amar?
Yes, I'm here. Is it clear
Okay.
now, Prof?
Yeah, I got it. Okay, you're back on.
Okay. I have to change the connections. Okay.
No, I think
Anyway,
it's probably the faculty connection. Don't worry.
Okay. My friend's dissertations, PhD dissertations, he performed mixed method actually,
Okay.
and during his write-up, or when he submit his full dissertations to the faculty, which is UKM, sorry, he add the actual interview transcript um, of his study in the appendix, along with the real name and everything.
Oh.
And it didn't be, it, I don't think he said that it wouldn't be a problem for him. It didn't be a problem for him during his Viva, and also he's graded excellently. So what do you comment about that? What is your opinion
So
on that?
you're referring to the fact that he used their real names in the transcripts? That was the issue?
Yes, the real name in the transcripts, and he put inside the whole transcripts is actually inside the appendix,
Oh,
accessible by everyone.
Yeah, that's not ethical. It's not ethical. I mean, if it's a mistake, it's a mistake. He can fix it, but if he, it shouldn't be in there. That's on it. That's a violation of ethics. Unless, sorry, let me take that back.
Okay.
I take that back. Unless the participant whose name is in there gave consent.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If they gave consent, no problem.
But the way I actually read the dissertations is actually quite a controversial write-up. Yes. So he said that it's necessary for him to put all their actual names and informations, including their positions and whatnot, in the dissertations, so that he can back it up. And apparently he graduated in 2019. So I was like, "Are you sure this is happening?" And then he said, "Yes."
That's unethical. Again, unless they gave him permission, they consented to it. It's not ethical. I mean, especially if he went into the interview and said, there was an agreement that their names would be kept confidential and stuff, and then he did that. That's very unethical.
Okay.
So please don't do that. I mean, it's always on this. Just always hedge on the safe side. Unless people give,
consent.
Yeah, not just consent, but like they give some sort of formal consent. I wouldn't even do it unless they put it in writing. If it was like in the consent form and they said, "Yeah, I consent to having my name used," and because publication, if he writes papers based on that, you're talking about disclosing a lot of very private information and stuff. Yeah. I would not do that unless I had certainty that I had their consent.
So and it put me on thoughts how those the panels during Viva, which actually maybe some of them is actually a qualitative background.
I don't know.
How do they go about that?
I don't know. They may have just missed it. Not everybody looks at the appendix that carefully. Okay. They may have just missed it. They probably didn't realize it, or they didn't see it, or unless he's made reference to it in chapter 3 and said, but I doubt that he did. So they probably didn't even realize it. That's my guess. They just didn't see it, or they missed it. Because no qualitative researcher would allow that. Even a quantitative researcher, I would suspect, wouldn't allow that if they knew anything about ethics, which they should.
Okay, thank you, Prof, for the response.
Yeah, that's a good case. I mean, that's a good example, though. Thanks, Amar. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, final questions for the semester. This is semester wrap-up time. Any question about anything related to quality research? Anything? Any lingering issues? Nothing? Everything's crystal clear. No, I'm just kidding. I don't expect it to be crystal clear. It's okay. Well, if not, I would invite you to, let me stop sharing this. I will invite you to post your comments on the Padlet
Oh,
when you get a chance. You can do it now, you can do it later. Best to do it now if possible.
okay.
All right. So please share with me what you felt you learned this semester and what you felt you need, what you feel you need more, you know, you still need to learn more about.
So we don't have to log in, right, Prof? Just like add the comment.
No, I'm pretty sure I set it up where you can just click on the link and then just when you go to the screen, just double click
Okay.
and then a box should open like that. And there's no names or anything. It's anonymous, so you can be honest as you like. All right. So everyone's cool. No more questions. We're all good. Assignments, nothing. Final exam, clear. Okay. Everything's on video this semester, so if you're not sure, you can always go back and watch the videos. So
Yeah.
it kind of helps. I think it's actually nice. It kind of helps that everything's on video. I wish there was a way we could do that for our face-to-face classes. Have all those on video too. It makes things easier. You know, you don't feel like you're missing anything. You just go back and rewatch it. So.
And we need a lot of equipments for that, Prof.
Yeah, seriously. But that, I mean, smart. You know, if you have like a smart classroom, you can do it.
Yep.
So anyway, well, I've enjoyed the semester. Even it's been a very eventful semester, a very unique semester. We spent 6 weeks together face to face, and then we've spent 8 weeks online. So I thank all of you for your participation. I've really enjoyed teaching you this semester. And I wish you guys all the best, inshallah, in your PhD work, your graduate work. And so feel free to follow up anytime if you have questions. You can always WhatsApp me or come see me. And then of course you're all welcome and invited to sit in on the class in future semesters if you'd like. A lot of students like to do that. You know, it's good to just refresh and you know, if you have questions and stuff like that. As you know, we have a lot of alumni that come and sit in the class again. So you're more than welcome to do that also. Okay. So I guess I will see all of you on the 4th, inshallah, for the final exam.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Okay. So if there's nothing else, then I will say adios.
Adios.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Okay. Sama.
Hope to see you again.
Inshallah, jumpa lagi ya.
Ya, jumpa lagi.
So good luck, everyone.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Take care. I will
Thank you.
share the video once I've uploaded it. Inshallah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Good luck with the rest of your semester, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Best of luck, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you
keep in touch-
all and
keep in
all the
touch with
best,
your-
everybody.
Keep in touch with your classmates. I'll keep the WhatsApp group active because even my previous semester WhatsApp groups, they're still active. They still share information and stuff like that. So it's just good to keep it open and keep it active.
Good to know.
All right. Okay. Assalamualaikum and good night, everyone.
Salam.
Good evening, I should say. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Selamat petang. Oh, I see some responses coming up already. This is good.
Yep.
Cool. All right, keep them coming. And I'll read them later.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye, Prof. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.